Okay, once again, Genesis chapter 32. Read the same verses again, verses 22 through verse 32. And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives, speaking of Jacob, and his 2 women servants, and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. When he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh, and in the sinew that shrank. Again, this is a landmark event in the spiritual history of Jacob. We all need such events in our lives. They are memorial events, events that we do not get away from. What we read here is God mastering Jacob, God overcoming and conquering Jacob. But not only that, but also transforming Jacob. We all need such events in our lives. I want to center our thought this afternoon, verse 25, the hollow, the socket of Jacob's thigh or hip was out of joint. In verse 31, he halted or limped upon his thigh or hip. And with that in mind, if we go over to Hebrews chapter 11, Hebrews 11, verse 21. So we have this picture of Jacob limping. In Hebrews 11, verse 21, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. You see Jacob leaning on the top of his staff. So what we read in Genesis 32 is an event that left God's mark upon Jacob. An event that could be seen in Jacob's life. An event that Jacob felt for the remainder of his life. We all need such events in our life. Again, the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint. As a result, he halted upon his thigh. And then in his elderly years, we see him leaning upon the top of his staff. Jacob, hip displaced, served as a reminder to him for the remainder of his life. We need such reminders of God's work in our lives. Our subject is a displaced hip life. A displaced hip life. So again, let's look at the event. It's a landmark event. Occurs 20 years after Jacob had left home. Back in chapter 27, Jacob, in his self-reliance, fled from home to his uncle Laban's house, where he would, not as planned, strenuously and continually serve Laban. Not as he planned, but he would be the victim of deceit. Back in chapter 30 and verse 25, he's again at his uncle's house. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go into mine own place and to my country. So Jacob's heart was set upon home. And in chapter 31 and verse 21, so he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. So Jacob flees from Laban's house, and he's heading in the direction of home. And there he is. He has Laban's daughters, which are now his wives, and their children, his herds, heading in the direction of home. In chapter 31, verse 22, 3 days after Jacob left, Laban was told what happened. And he pursues Jacob. His intent is to bring them back by force. But God, in chapter 31, would intervene on Jacob's behalf and spare him, give him victory, bring him to favor with Laban. And then we come to chapter 32. Again, Jacob is on his way home, returning from a 20-year exile, returning to the land given to his fathers by Jehovah. And in verse 1, the angels of God met him. God has intervened. This was done to show Jacob whom he owed his recent escape from Laban, and to assure Jacob that he could safely trust God for what lie ahead. In verse 2, Jacob termed these angels, the angels were plural, as God's host, singular. And Jacob called the name of the place Mahanaim, meaning two hosts. Two hosts. Probably encompassing him from the front and the rear. But either way, he's surrounded by this host of God. This was comforting assurance from God that he was with Jacob and that he would preserve him. But Jacob's entire life has been marked by self-reliance and manipulation. His has been a life of unbelief and self-sufficiency. And as a result, his life has been one of dysfunction. His life has been one of difficulty upon difficulty because he insisted on working the angles. He insisted on making things happen rather than wait upon God. His entire life has been marked by the thought process that the ends justify the means. That's Jacob. That's who Jacob is. There's a lot of Jacobs. And we all have a lot of Jacob in us. So his life has been marked by difficulties. Now he has this assurance from God that he could trust God. But Jacob still takes matters into his own hands. Notice verses 3 through 5. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother. Rather than just trusting God, I'm going to make things happen. Unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, Thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau. You didn't even tell him what to say. Thy servant Jacob with us, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses and flocks and men servants and women servants. And I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. His intent, of course, is to appease Esau. God has just appeared to him, basically saying, Jacob, trust me. But word comes to Jacob, verse 6, that Esau is coming in Jacob's direction with 400 men. Jacob, verse 7, is greatly afraid. That is, he's fearful and distressed. That means he's worried. He's troubled. He's upset. He's completely forgotten God's host. That's already out of his mind. And immediately, upon hearing this, Jacob begins to plan and to plot. Because that's what he's always done. And we see that in verses 7 and 8. In verses 9 through 23, Jacob prays. But again, though he has prayed, he continues to plan and continues to plot, trying to manipulate the situation. And before we get too hard on Jacob, look at our own lives. We pray, and then we take matters in our own hands and begin to try to manipulate the situation. In verse 24, again, it is Jacob alone. And there he is. He has lived his life by self-reliance, by planning and plotting, working the angles. His life has been marked by unbelief and a refusal to let go of his own ways. There he is. His entire life has been marked by resistance to God and struggle against God. Again, his thought process has always been the ends justify the means. And now he's alone. He's alone. This would be followed, as we saw this morning, a meeting with God. A landmark event in the spiritual history of Jacob. God interrupting his life. God disrupting the life of Jacob. We all need such God events in our lives. God gets Jacob's attention. We all need such events in our lives. God has our attention. It is God showing Himself as the Most High to Jacob. Again, we all need such events in our lives. It is God bringing Jacob to acknowledge Himself, who He is, and the life that he has lived up to this point. We all need such events in our lives. It is God bringing Jacob to realize his own weakness, his own insufficiency. And we all need such events in our lives. Many will say, yes, I know I'm insufficient, but then they'll proceed to plan and plot and manipulate. So they really don't know. It is God delivering Jacob from himself, causing Jacob to realize his need of God in his life. He blessed him there. When God does these things, that's God's blessing. Is God drawing Jacob to a right position before God, clinging to God, clinging, holding on to God. It is God giving Jacob a God experience in his life. It's God touching the life of Jacob. It is God leaving His mark upon Jacob. A heavenly touch, a touch of power upon Jacob. It is the presence and movement of God upon Jacob's life. We all need such events in our lives. God transforming Jacob. People will say all the time, well, I'm going to change. No doubt we all need to change. But the sooner we realize we can't change ourselves, the better off we'll be. And leave that matter with God. God's changes are permanent. Man's changes are temporary. Very temporary. It is God aligning Jacob's life to himself. That's what this meeting accomplished. Bringing Jacob's life in alignment with God. We need such events in our lives. He brings Jacob to the place of clinging to God. With all of that in mind, remember, the hollow or the socket of Jacob's thigh or hip was out of joint. And as a result, Jacob halted upon his thigh, or he limped. And I believe he did so the rest of his life. Jacob walked with a limp. It is God's reminding mark upon Jacob. With each limping step, God was reminding Jacob, no more Jacob, no more Jacob, but Israel. He was reminding Jacob. As a result of God's touch, Jacob walks with a limp. And every step that he took was a reminder of this event in the life of Jacob. Every day he got up, As he walked through the day, Jacob was being reminded, no more Jacob, but Israel. Someone might ask Jacob, why are you limping? And Jacob might reply, because I've been blessed. Because I've been blessed. You see, I was independent. I was self-reliant. But God came to me and showed me my weakness and my need of Him. And every time I get up, and every time I try to go somewhere, that limp reminds me of my weakness. That limp reminds me of my dependency upon God. It reminds me that without Him, I can do nothing. I'm blessed. Each step I take, every move I make, God is reminding me, Jacob, don't get too caught up with yourself. Don't start planning and plotting. Don't start doing things your way. Don't manipulate. Trust me. You will prevail with me. And he halted upon his thigh. God's reminding mark was upon his life that he, in and of himself, was helpless. Was helpless. Again, Jacob halted upon his thigh. With each limping step, Jacob was being reminded, your way doesn't work. Your way doesn't work. Your way led to 20 years of service. 20 years. Your way led to you never seeing your mother again. Jacob, your way doesn't work. No more Jacob, but Israel. You will prevail with me. With each limping step, there was a reminder that his ways led to emptiness. His ways led to frustration. You think upon the frustration that Jacob had at his uncle's house. He was only going to be there a few days. Few days turned into 20 years. And it was 20 years of frustration. 20 years of failure. 20 years of turmoil and unrest. And a downward spiral of dysfunction. And with each limping step, Jacob is being reminded, your way doesn't work. Remember what your way leads to. So there's Jacob limping along. A reminder that self-interest, self-confidence, self-seeking, self-sufficiency, all of that gets in the way of productive spiritual living. Jacob was being reminded of that. With each limping step, there was the reminder of the danger of misplaced priorities. When people try to manipulate situations and work all the angles, the priorities aren't right. The priorities aren't right. Their concerns aren't right. Again, he halted upon his thigh. With each limping step, he was reminded of God's grace. God could have destroyed him. He was being reminded of God's mercy. He was being reminded of the patience of God and the love of God. With each limping step, there was a reminder to Jacob, let go. Let go of your own way. Let go of your own plans. Let go. Commit. Dedicate. Submit. Yield. Confine the totality of your being to God. And I believe Jacob was being reminded of that. Each step he took. With each step, Jacob is being reminded of the importance of leaning upon God, depending upon God, relying upon God, clinging to God. He's being reminded of the importance of just simply trusting God and waiting upon Him. Jacob and his mother did not have to come up with a plan to get the birthright. God allowed them to get the birthright even through their planning. But had they not planned, he still would have got the birthright. It would have been a lot easier. There wouldn't have been 20 years away at his uncle's house. God will work His plan. And with each step that Jacob took, God is reminding him, Jacob, you trust me. It's Psalm 37, verse 5. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust in Him. Now we have to trust in order to commit. But the order here is commit and trust. So you trust and you commit. And in order to keep committing, what do you have to do? You have to keep trusting. And each step, Jacob is being reminded of this. It is Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. And then this is explained. What does he mean? With all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. That's what Jacob and Mom did. They leaned on their own understanding. And it caused them a life of turmoil. It's Isaiah 26:4. Trust ye in the Lord forever, for in the Lord Jehovah is everlasting strength. So with every step, Jacob is being reminded, move away from yourself. Step out with me. Walk with me. Follow me. Get away from yourself. Get away from your reasoning. With every step, Jacob is being reminded, God's the focal point. The focal point is not what I want. God is the focal point. The emphasis. What was the emphasis with Jacob and his mother? We've got to get this birthright. We've got to make sure we get it. God already told them they'd get it. But that was the emphasis. It became the emphasis. It became the priority. And it wreaked havoc in their life. Wreaked havoc in their home. With every step, Jacob is being reminded, of his identity with God. He's been reminded of the goodness of God in his life. In fact, go over to Genesis 48. An elderly Jacob looking back upon his life. Genesis 48, verse 15. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day. God takes care of his own. And he will. We don't have to help him. We don't have to manipulate. God will take care of his own. With each step, Jacob is being reminded that life is to be lived rooted to the Lord, defined by the Lord, lived in correlation to the Lord, lived moving in the direction of the Lord. With each limping step, Jacob is being reminded that God is his protection. God is the place where he could hide. God is the place where he could find safety and provision. The place where he could find quiet. The place where he could fortify his mind. Again, the hollow, the socket of Jacob's thigh or hip was out of joint. And he halted upon his thigh. And it all goes back to Genesis 32, a landmark event in the life of Jacob, a life-altering event, an event that saw God mastering, overcoming, and conquering Jacob. An event in which Jacob was delivered of himself. The hollow, the socket of his thigh, hip, was out of joint, and he halted upon his hip. God left a God mark upon Jacob. And that is what every child of God needs. A God mark upon their life. Life can leave many marks upon our lives. And when I say it leaves a mark, it defines our lives. Many of those we have to overcome, because we won't be able to serve God if we don't. I think of Joseph. I don't know if there's ever been a person that came from a more dysfunctional, and this is quite a statement considering the dysfunction all around us, more of a dysfunctional family than Joseph. But he served God. And he was faithful. Because God's mark upon Joseph was greater than life's mark upon Joseph. And again, life will leave its marks. Your upbringing may leave its marks. But somewhere along the line, if you're going to serve God, you're going to have to overcome that. And the way to do that, the way that is done, is God intervenes in our life. God blesses us by mastering us, by overcoming us. We fight against the very thing that will help us the most. We fight against, and everybody does it by nature. It's ingrained in us. We fight against God mastering and overcoming and conquering us. We fight against that. We've got to hang on to ourselves. But it's the very thing that blesses us. It's the very thing that makes our lives better. So the blessing, God revealed Himself and brought Jacob, no more Jacob, but Israel. We all have Jacob in us. Oh, that those words were true. No more Jacob. No more Jacob, but Israel. You will prevail with me. You will prevail with men because of me. You will live a conquering life, and I am the source. No more Jacob. God help us. Brother David, you come and lead us